Okay, tonight, probably for, I'm not sure how long it'd take us, probably at least about 3, maybe 4, depending on how it goes. I'm not sure how it's going to go to get through this. I was asked, or it was discussed, it's been now probably a couple months. I've been thinking about this a couple months and how to approach it, or exactly how to do it or get to it. A couple of verses that individuals had some questions about. One of them in particular I have dealt with before in talking to some people, even in marriage counseling and things of this nature. And I've seen this kind of firsthand, and I know there are some Christian counselors that I believe are teaching error when it comes to this one particular verse. But I'll read the verses here, and we'll talk about how we're going to discuss it. And so what I decided to do, we're going to kind of get into about 3 or 4 nights on marriage, but on these particular things when it comes to marriage, and we'll get to that. But in 1 Corinthians 7, beginning at verse 15, it says, "But if the unbeliever departs, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases. But God has called us to peace." This is one of the verses that someone wanted me to deal with, but I wanted to read the whole context. It says, "For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? But as God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while let him who is circumcised, let him be not circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping the commandments of God is what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he is called." This is the verse in particular that we're going to be discussing. But it says, "Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he is called while free is Christ's slave. But you were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called." So the 2 verses that's in consideration is one, if a spouse leaves through desertion, does that give the individual that is left behind the right to remarry? And the other one is remain in the calling in which you were called. In other words, if you're in an adulterous marriage and you get baptized, you and your spouse or one of your whatever, can you remain in that marriage? Does that cleanse of all sins and the sin of adultery where you remain in that adulterous marriage? And that's one that I know that some Christian counselors are saying, yes, you can. And we're going to discuss that. But in order to do this, I thought about this a lot, just dealing directly with these verses, but you can't really do that. You really have to go to the whole context in which Paul is discussing. So we're going to go back to chapter 6 just a little bit to see what Paul was dealing with, and being able to assume the questions he was getting asked by the answers that he was getting. Because that's one problem that you have with Corinthians here. We're getting one side of the situation. We're getting Paul dealing with the questions in which he was asked, and I believe we can ascertain what they were asking him based on the answers that he was given. And I tell you, these are a couple difficult passages. Anytime you get into 1 Corinthians, I guess anytime that I've ever taught out of 1 Corinthians 7, I end up leaving one congregation, so I guess need to tell Tanya to start packing, I guess maybe. One, I had a gentleman come over to the house and knocked on the door and ended up choking me for just a little while. We got that worked out though. It was strange. He was upset, that's for sure. And all I did was read scripture. That's all that you can do. But anytime, and I kind of make jokes about it a little bit, but it is a serious situation. Anytime you deal with this subject, there are so many emotions that are involved because so many families deal with things like this in some form or fashion, and there's just a lot of emotions that's involved. But one thing we have to do is take that out of it and just realize, what does the Bible say? And that's all that you can do, is take what the Bible says. But what I want to do, I want us to back up, because before the Apostle Paul enters into this discussion about the questions about marriage, he deals with sexual immorality. And the reason I think that he deals with sexual immorality is because how a person views sexual immorality, and how a person views things like this when it comes to premarital sex, when it comes to adultery, when it comes to homosexuality, when it comes to all of these things, and we can go through a list, how a person views that and where their stance is on these types of things, that really affects a person's thinking when they go into a marriage. And then when they go into a marriage, their mind is already made up on certain things about the commitment when it comes to marriage, about the how much work is involved, how much work they're willing to put in marriage, and really the sanctity of marriage itself. So how a person thinks when they go into that situation has a lot to do with how that marriage is going to be and how that marriage turns out. So I think that's why I think we need to back up and see some of the things that Paul is dealing with here. In our society, we see it running rampant. There's so much marriage problems, but I believe it stems from an individual's thinking when it comes to the sexual immorality of things, of how a person views that. And I think that can skew their thinking. And I think that's what Paul is doing here, and I think that's why he starts where he does and the things that he does. But if you look in 1 Corinthians 6, we're going to start with verse 9 here. He says, "Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor rivals, nor extortioners will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you, but you were washed, but you were sanctified, but you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of our God." So before we go, we're going to stop there for a minute, Brian. Before we get into some other things, notice what he's saying here. He says, why would you want to go back and live like this when you have done something? You've been sanctified, you've been justified, you've been set apart. So what he's saying is, what their mind frame is when it comes to fornication, when it comes to idolaters, when it comes to adulterers, when it comes to homosexuality, when it comes to these things, what if they're already wanting to turn back to that, then their mind frame is that way of life is okay. And he's going to go in and discuss some of the things in which they're thinking, because what they're really doing is, and we're going to see this, is they're separating the flesh from the spirit. And there's some individuals that do that. A lot of the once saved, always saved, when it comes to that doctrine, they say it doesn't matter what you do in the flesh, it doesn't affect the spirit. So you can basically do whatever you want to in the flesh, and that doesn't touch the spirit. The spirit is already designed to go to God. So everything's all right spiritually. And that's, in some form of that, I believe that's what the Corinthians are thinking here. It's just fleshly things. And these fleshly things don't really matter. You can do whatever you want to. And Paul's going to start dealing with these types of things. And he begins at verse 12 in doing this. And he's using an argument. He's kind of answering an argument that they're giving him here. He says, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Food for the stomach and stomach for the food, but God will destroy both it and them. Now the body is not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God both raised up the Lord and will also raise us up by His power." Now, what is Paul talking about here? He begins by quoting, I believe, what the Corinthians were saying to justify their immoral behavior. And here's kind of what they're doing. They're like, well, all things are lawful for me. I can do whatever I want to. It's my body. Just like they say, well, food is food for the stomach and stomach for the food. It's just a fleshly thing. You know, you're hungry. You have this desire for hunger. You're going to eat. It's a fleshly desire. Sexual immorality, they're saying, is the same thing. I've got this desire. I'm going to fulfill this desire. It's my body. I can do with whatever I want. Does that kind of thinking sound familiar today? When it comes to abortion, when it comes to it's my body, I can do whatever I want to with my body. You can't tell me what to do with my body. And that's what their thinking was. All things are lawful. They're kind of thinking about their freedom. I have the ability to do this. And Paul's argument is, just because you have the ability or the desire to do this, doesn't mean you have the right to do this. Doesn't mean it's helpful. He's not defending and saying sexual immorality is okay to do. What he's defending is, just because even if you could make the argument that it was okay, it's not helpful and it's not okay. It's like a young kid saying, well, I've got the ability to go play out in the street. Well, just because you have the ability to go play out in the street doesn't mean that's a helpful thing to do. Doesn't mean that's a good thing to do, right? So Paul is saying, just for argument's sake, if you're saying you've got the freedom to do it, just because you've got the freedom to do it doesn't mean it would be the right thing to do. Now, again, he's not making the argument that it's okay to do it. We're going to go on and see that. But what he's saying is, their line of thinking is skewed. You can't just say, just because I can do it, I ought to be able to do it. It goes back to that. It's my body. I got the desire for food. I'm going to eat. You can't tell me not to eat. I've got the ability to eat. I'll eat what I want to. It's just a fleshly thing. It's just a desire. It's just a natural thing that's in us. Well, that's what they're thinking about when it comes to sexual immorality. It's just a desire that's in me, so I can do whatever I want. But notice he goes on here as he says, well, let's back up. I'm in that verse. I'm sorry, Brian. He says, food for the stomach and stomach for the food, but God will destroy both in them. Now, the body is not for sexual immorality, but it's for the Lord. But notice up here when he says, all things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. One of his arguments that he's making is not only, okay, you may have the freedom to do it and the desire to do it, and the desire may be strong to do it there, but you have to overcome that desire. You can't give in to your desires like that. You can't be overcome with it. You can't be, he says, you can't be brought under the power of it. Because again, their argument is, it's a desire. I can't control my desire, so I'll do what I want to give in to that desire. Paul said we can't be brought under the power of anything. And in this case, he's talking about sexual immorality. And he's going to go in and explain this. And let me just say this on the onset. He's not saying sexual desire is evil. He's not saying that at all. What he's saying is there's a place for that sexual desire. You don't just gratify it anywhere that you want to, any way that you want to. God does put that desire in us. We have that desire. It is a natural desire. It's actually a good desire, and it's designed for a purpose. But he says you can't give in to it to use it any way that you want to do. And what was going on here, and you can go back and look at history and see, they were actually going, and Paul's going to deal with this, they were going with the temple prostitutes, just like the pagan religion was. They were going back and forth with that. And that wasn't going to be any big deal. They could still be a Christian. They could still participate in those traditions and those things that they did. And Paul said, you can't do that. You're different. You've been set apart. You've been sanctified. You've been justified. So this thinking of adultery's okay, idolatry's okay, fornication's okay, sexual immorality, all of these things that you used to think was just the natural desire of individuals, you can't think that way anymore. Because it's not like that. That's not how God designed it. And he's going to go on to explain that. And the reason I wanted to start here, because how a person thinks about these things, what a person's attitude is toward these types of things is going to determine how they're going to think within that marriage. And here in particular, when it comes to these Corinthian Christians here, he says, okay, you've done something that's different. So you've done something that sets you apart. You can't keep doing the same things that you've been doing. You can't go back to that. So Paul has to start here at this argument. Now, and he gives some arguments about this. And he starts first. He says, just because, again, you think something is lawful doesn't mean that it's helpful. It can destroy you if you give in to these desires in any way that you want to. Just like I said, a kid may say, well, I've got the ability and I've got the desire to go out and play in the street. Just because you can physically do it, and just because you want to, doesn't mean it's a helpful thing to do. If you use that desire any way that you want to, it could be trouble. Now, let me put it a little more home. I use references like this a lot. Say somebody cuts me off in traffic. I've got the desire to run them off the road. I've got the ability to do it. I've even said in my mind before, probably out loud in the truck, I might even said it with Mike with me sometimes, my truck's bigger than that one. I can run them off the road. I have the ability to do it, and I've really got the desire to do it because of what they've done. Would it be helpful for me to do it? Would it be right for me to do it? Would God want me to do that? You see, that's what we're talking about. Just because I have this desire to do this in this particular way doesn't mean that that's a helpful thing to do. And secondly, he talks about that he's not going to be dominated by anything. He says, I'm not going to be brought under the power of anything, as we said. Now, notice also, he makes in his third point here in verse 13, he says that the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but meant for the Lord. What's he saying here? Well, they were saying that, well, the stomach's for food for stomach. You eat, it's just for your stomach. It's just a fleshly thing. But Paul says that that this sexual immorality that you're doing, it's not just a fleshly thing. It goes more than that. It's something more than you think that it is. It's not just a sexual thing. There's more that's involved. So what they're basically saying, and I'm not going to try to get graphic, what they're saying, it's just sex. It doesn't matter. But what Paul is going to say here and prove, it's more than that. It's not just that. There's a joining that's there. It's not just sex. That's why it's so important that we're teaching our kids about premarital sex and the dangers that's there. It's why we teach them that marriage is a commitment, and it's something that's between a husband and wife, that's a sacred thing, and that there shouldn't be any infidelity, because someone will say, well, it's just sex. I just went out and had sexual relations with someone. No, it's much more than that. It's not just about that. And that's what Paul is saying here, because that's what they are saying. It's just a fleshly thing. But he's saying that, he's going to say that God has put this desire here. It's much more than just that. He says the body is for the Lord and the Lord is for the body. There's something that happens as they, in particular in this context, as they were going with these prostitutes in this priestly temple and going to that, he said, you're joining to them, and it's not just about sex. He said, you're joined with the Lord, but yet you're going and joining with them, because it's more than just flesh. You're becoming one with them. And you can't do that and be with the Lord at the same time. So you've got to get this out of your mind that it's just a fleshly thing, because it's not. It's something that goes far beyond that. That's why God put that desire there. And we need to be teaching this to our young people. We need to be telling them that, and so they can understand that and preparing themselves for marriage. And so they can have the right attitude as they go into their marriage and see what kind of commitment it is as God intended for it to be, all the way back from Genesis 2:24, leaving father and mother and doing what? Being joined together. There's something to that. It's not just a physical thing. It's not just an act in which you do. There's more to it than that. And if you take it out of the context, that's what makes it so much more damaging. And that's something that our society just doesn't realize. And again, that's what Paul is dealing with here. And that's why I wanted to start here, because the Corinthians' thinking has to do with how Paul is going to answer their questions when it comes to marriage, about marriage to a believer, to an unbeliever, or if one deserts, or anything about marriage. He says you can't understand that unless you understand the purpose that God has behind it. So, any questions thus far? I'm going to try to keep talking so I don't get too many questions on this and we don't get too far where I don't want to go. But I think it's just very important. And this makes me uncomfortable. I'm as uncomfortable as you are up here talking about this. So, but go ahead. We'll talk about tomorrow at lunch. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think he's talking about, no, I don't. I think he's talking about the freedom that you have in Christ on certain things. Is what I think. That he's talking about, that they're saying, okay, we're Christians now, that's a spiritual thing. I can do this, it's a fleshly thing. And Paul was saying, well, all things may be lawful for me to do. But again, I don't think he is condoning their sexual behavior. I think he's saying their argument is flawed in doing that, I believe. You got any thoughts on it? You think different? No. Yeah, I think he's talking about spiritual freedom, is what I think he's talking about. And there are things that aren't inherently sin within themselves, and I think that's the point he's trying to make. As a Christian, they're not inherent sins, but they can become a sin if they overpower me to where they can control me. And the subject he's dealing with here, their sexual desires have done that, to where they go to these priestly temples and with these prostitutes, that it has become power over them. It is what is actually taking place. But Paul is saying, okay, say your line of reasoning is right, that it is just fleshly and you can do it. Well, you couldn't use that argument because it's got power over you. So that makes it sin within itself. So he's actually using, I think, their argument against them of not to do that. But again, he goes back to the body is for the Lord and the Lord is for the body. There's at least two things here I think that we can take away. First, I think God is commanding when you are regarding your body and when it comes to sexual immorality, that it's almost like it's inherently something evil. And I think Paul is making two different arguments here. One, okay, I'm against what you're doing here, the sexual immorality, and how you're abusing your desire, but I'm not saying that the desire comes from evil, because it doesn't. It comes from God. What he's saying is there's a place for that desire, and it's designed in that joining together of husband and wife. That's where that desire is supposed to be managed and controlled and enjoyed, he says. As he goes on and talks about what that relationship is, as we're going to see, between the husband and wife, he says, but it's a sacred thing. Because you have joined yourself with God when you become a Christian, and you join yourself. You know what he's really going to say, and we're going to see this? Your body is not yours. Your body is two people's. Your body is God's, and your body is your spouse. So it's not for you to say, I can do with whatever I want to with it. You know, when it comes to serving God, it's no longer my will anymore, is it? It's God's will. I do what He wants to do. So I may have to balance that, any fleshly desires or self-desires that I may have, no matter what they are, to serve God. Because it's all about God now, right? When I become a husband, it's not about me anymore. It's about my spouse. So it's not mine anymore, right? So it's not just what my desires are, which I have desires, and Paul said the husband has desires, the wife has desires. And I'm not just talking about sexually, I'm talking about just you joining together as a whole. It's not me anymore. It's not about me. It's not about what I want. It's about giving what I'm supposed to as a husband and all my husbandly duties and given what I am as a Christian. Does that make sense? And we have to realize that. And that's what Paul is telling them. Paul is saying, you're saying it's just your body. You do whatever you want to do with it. I'm telling you, it's not. It's not your body to do whatever you want to do with it. And it's not just about sexual immorality. You're saying it's just a fleshly thing. Sex is not just sex. It's more than that. It's a joining together. And he says, that's what you're doing. Are you going to join with God? Or are you going to join with this? Which one is it? You've been sanctified. You've been justified. You've been set apart. You've done differently. It used to be idolatry. It used to be adultery. It used to be fornication. It used to be homosexuality. It used to be these things. But it's not now because you joined yourself with God. So why would you want to go back and join yourself into something that's evil? They can't have a leg to stand on with Paul's argument, can they? But he has to start here to be able to go through and build that foundation of, okay, you got to change your thinking. Don't look at what society's doing. Don't look at the culture around you, because that's what they were doing. Looking at the culture, and the culture says this is what you do. Don't look at the culture around you. Look and see what God wants you to do and be different, because you're set apart. And again, that's what we need to be teaching our young people. Don't look around at culture. Don't look at TV. Don't listen to the music. Don't watch all this and listen to what the world says that this is how you live. It's just fleshly things. It's not. It's more than that. And we need to be telling our young people that, especially as they're planning for marriage and what their thoughts is on marriage. Now, where are we at? Verse 15? Let's go to verse 15. He goes on with his argument. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? See, he goes on. Your body's for the Lord for the body. Notice, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a harlot? Certainly not. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a harlot is one body with her? See what he's telling them? It's not just a fleshly thing. You see what you're doing? You see what you're joining? It's not just about the flesh. You're joining what God intended for you to join with husband and wife. Leave father and mother and be joined together. And that's not just a fleshly thing. That's a one spirit, one body thing. And he says that's what it's designed to do. And he says that's what makes this immoral and wrong. He says, where'd I get to? Harlot and one body with her. For the two, he says, shall become one flesh. He goes back and quotes Genesis 2:24. But he who's joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. He says, you got to make a choice. You can't go back and forth. You can't be part of the world and do these worldly things and be part of God. You've been set apart. You've been different. You've got to start acting different. So what he's dealing with is get away from what culture is. Culture is doing like it's always been done. It's doing, and here's where culture has got with us that to me is so aggravating, is even when it comes to homosexuality or something of this nature, okay, it used to be, okay, this person believes in homosexuality, it's not affecting my life, I know it's wrong, don't let that infringe on what I believe, you do your life. You can't do that anymore in our society. Now it's you got to believe it's right or you are wrong. It's not just about tolerating something. It's about you have to accept it. And the same thing goes when it comes to sexual immorality and these things. It's just a way of life. It's just how it goes back to evolution. It goes back to desire. It goes back to might is right. All of these things are woven in this. And what Paul is doing, he's saying you've got to separate that. For you to have the right view of marriage, you've got to look and see what God intended marriage to be. And that's what he's going to go on and talk about. Let's go a little bit farther, Brian. I didn't know if I'd get this far or not. Notice verse 18. He says, flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body. But he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. See, he goes and he's discussing how different this is. He's talking about, there's sins, And then there's sins here. And he says this sin, especially when it comes into marriage, because it's not just about, oh, I had a fling, or it's not just about, oh, I made a mistake. It's about you joined yourself here and made the choice that you're gonna break this covenant that's here. That's why it's so grievous, and that's why it's so hard, though not impossible. It's so hard to overcome that, because that's a pretty strong violation there of that covenant that God has instructed and that God has condoned. And so Paul is dealing with that. But notice how he says you flee sexual immorality that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Now, here's where it comes to. He says, flee it. How do you keep, now he's getting into when it comes to marriage or even this sexual desire, how do you overcome that? What does he say here in the very beginning of 18? How do you overcome it? Flee. Yeah, you don't flirt with it. You don't see how close you can get to it. You flee from it. And flee from it means run. You be like Joseph. You leave your coat and you just run. Don't put yourself in that situation. I looked up when it comes to infidelity in marriage. I just wanted what the top 5 causes were of how that began. You know what the top 3 was that says that you had to be cautious of? Work, social media, and church. That this one particular counselor, I guess they were a marriage counselor, said this is where they dealt with the most. And here's some of the things that they said when it come to this. When it come to work, it says that this is extremely dangerous and must be carefully watched. Don't allow yourself to flirt. Don't allow for compliments on looks that goes too far. I'm not sure what they meant by that. Do not sit with an opposite gender and have private discussions about your private life at home, because what that does is start giving that bond. There it says, all discussions must be about work and not about home or problems or whatever. By doing so, you're opening up the door to a relationship that will infringe upon your marriage. So what are this counselor, what are they basically saying? Don't put yourself in a situation, if you're married with the opposite sex, to where you get too personal. Do you think that would be a fair thing to say, not to do that? It's got to start somewhere, doesn't it? So shut the door before it does. Be careful with that they're saying. You may work around a lot and get in situations to where with the opposite sex, to where you may have a problem at home and you start confiding in or sharing things. It goes back to that circle that I always do in premarital counseling. You got you, God, and your spouse is in that circle. Nobody gets in that circle. You don't share intimate details. You don't, share weaknesses with your spouse just because you're frustrated with them. Whatever the case may be, you stay in that circle and it won't ever become a problem. And that's for a lot of different reasons. One, temptation won't be there. Two, out of respect for your spouse. I mean, you want to be respected when your spouse is talking to other people, don't you? So don't let it ever become that. And I think that's, in so many words, what this individual is saying. Another one is online dangers. This comes when you talk about fleeing sexual immorality. Talks about online. And here it says they're not talking about pornography, which pornography is an issue. It says rather they're speaking about the problem with social media. They said that they have witnessed many affairs and divorces occur because people have reconnected with old flames and childhood crushes from their school days. What begins as innocent conversations develop into the breeding ground for an affair. So we need to put some boundaries when we're married. You're welcome to monitor the status of your friends and make comments. It says, but you must avoid any kind of drawn-out conversations. It is dangerous of anything that can lead to an affair. So it's basically the same thing as work, just don't do that online either. You know, don't put yourself in that situation to where you're having discussions like that, or you're doing. And that's something, as I was growing up, social media wasn't a thing, but I guess that's what a lot of people have to deal with today, and it's a real problem. For individuals, there might be something going on at home again that you want to start confiding in, and then before you know it, one thing leads to another, and then there's infidelity. Then the other one is church. It says in church that you're supposed to be enjoined, and you are, as the family of Christ. And I'm just quoting some of this counselor of the things that they dealt with. It says the danger is that they can let their guard down and think that because they are Christians, they are safe from these temptations. Yet so many affairs have happened in church by not being careful with boundaries. Even among Christians, there's no reason for two people of the opposite gender who are married to ever really be alone with each other together at any given time. It says even though they are Christians, it's very dangerous. Sometimes there are extenuating circumstances where that may happen, but it's the same thing. Whether it's work, social media, church, again, don't put yourself in those situations. And really, I agree. I don't think there's anything on here I've seen that I don't agree with. You know, when it comes to, and again, it's not about trust. I was reading some, and it was talking about that, spouses should have access to every aspect of each other's life. And I agree with that. And I don't think it's about trust. I think it's about respect. I think it comes to you respect your spouse enough to not put yourself in that situation. Because one, it may not be about trust, but you can't trust Satan, can you? Satan is going to be at every moment that he can to find an opportunity. And in doing that, I think Christians, as it says, you have to be vigilant, you have to be sober-minded and thinking and always alert that you don't put yourself in situations to where one thing can lead to one thing, can lead to another, and then before you know it, infidelity is there. And we've seen it. We've all seen it in some form or fashion. But that's what Paul is dealing with. That's why he starts here at first. He says, flee sexual immorality. Get away from it. Don't be a part of it. Don't let yourself be even close to that situation. And I think that's a good practice to live by. Is because you make a choice when you're married. You've made that commitment. You've made that choice. It's no longer you anymore. You're joined in one flesh. So you don't become, okay, we're married, but I'll live my life, you live your life, and all this. It doesn't work that way. You live one life together. And that's the way that God intended for it to be. And we're probably going to have to stop there before we get into any more. But any questions about what we've discussed so far?
You brought up the venting to a coworker. I mean, there's a little bit better solution to that. Try not to put your spouse in a situation where they need to vent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and this counsel went on to say it goes down to broken communication at home that leads to a spouse, one or the other, feel like that they got to talk to somebody else. But yeah, try to fix that. Try not to put them in a situation where they want to. And that's the thing, and that's why what your attitude before you go into marriage is. Realize that you're going to have struggles in marriage. You're going to have problems in marriage. There's going to be times where, it's hard to talk to your spouse because it's hard to look at them at that moment, right? You're in a disagreement and you're thinking, okay, I just need a little space for about 5 minutes here or something. And then what happens? Then they go vent to someone else, and before you know it, they're sharing intimate details. And before you know it, somebody else is listening to them when maybe their spouse. And then again, one thing leads to another. It's like anything else. If you don't ever open the door won't ever be open. So don't even crack it just a little bit. And that's the thing when it comes to homosexuality, when it comes to things like this. You open that door just a little bit, where does it stop? It don't stop with homosexuality, does it? It stops with any kind of sexual immorality. Because if one's going to be okay, why not all of them? Where's the moral standard for that? And that's, I think, what Paul is dealing with here. They were thinking in the flesh when Paul said, you got to think different than that. Don't think just the flesh. If you're just going to be guided by the flesh, then where does that end up? You either walk in the Spirit or you walk in the flesh. One leads to life everlasting, one leads to destruction. And Paul even talked about it here. Again, don't misunderstand, and we're going to get into this a little bit more. We just had to start from the negative points tonight. Paul is not saying that this desire is evil. It's just the placement of this desire, or the overcome of this desire in the wrong places of what they were doing that becomes evil. So, okay, we'll go a little bit farther than that next week.